Chapter 2. The Mail Coach. The two shouting men shoved Rashid and Haroun into the back seat of a beaten-up car with torn scarlet seats, and even though the car's cheap radio was playing movie music at top volume, the shouting men went on shouting about the unreliability of storytellers all the way to the rusting iron gates of the bus depot. Here, Haroun and Rashid were dumped out of the car without ceremony or farewell. "Expenses of the journey?" Rashid hopefully inquired. But the shouting men shouted, "More cash demands! Cheek, cheek of the Jappy!" and drove away at high speed, forcing dogs and cows and women with baskets of fruit on their head to dive out of the way. Loud music and rude words continued to pour out of the car as it zigzagged away into the distance. Rashid didn't even bother to shake his fist. Haroun followed him toward the ticket office, across a dusty courtyard with walls covered in strange warnings. "If you try to rush or zoom, you are sure to meet your doom," was one of them. And "all the dangerous overtakers end up safe at the undertaker's" was another. And also, "look out, slow down, don't be funny, life is precious, cars cost money." "There should be one about not shouting at passengers in the back seat," Haroun muttered. Rashid went to buy a ticket. There was a wrestling match at the ticket window instead of a queue, because everyone wanted to be first. And as most people were carrying chickens or children or other bulky items, the result was a free-for-all out of which feathers and toys and dislodged hats kept flying. And from time to time, some dizzy fellow with ripped clothes would burst out of the melee, triumphantly waving a little scrap of paper, his ticket. Rashid, taking a deep breath, dived into the scrum. Meanwhile, in the courtyard of the buses, small dust clouds were rushing back and forth like little desert whirlwinds. Haroun realized that these clouds were full of human beings. There were simply too many passengers at the bus depot to fit into the available buses. And anyhow, nobody knew which bus was leaving first, which made it possible for the drivers to play a mischievous game. One driver would start his engine, adjust his mirrors, and behave as if he was about to leave. At once, a bunch of passengers would gather up their suitcases and bedrolls and parrots and transistor radios and rush toward him. Then he'd switch off his engine with an innocent smile. While on the far side of the courtyard, a different bus would start up and the passengers would start running all over again. "It's not fair," Haroun said aloud. "Correct," a booming voice behind him answered, but, you'll admit it's much too fun to watch." The owner of this voice turned out to be an enormous fellow with a great quiff of hair, standing straight up on his head like a parrot's crest. His face, too, was extremely hairy, and the thought popped into Haroun's mind that all this hair was, well, somehow feather-like. Oh, ridiculous idea, he told himself. What on earth made me think a thing like that? It's just plain nonsense, as anyone can see. Just then, two separate dust clouds of scurrying passengers collided in an explosion of umbrellas and milk turns and rope sandals, and Haroun, without meaning to, began to laugh. "You're a tip-top type," boomed the fellow with the feathery hair. "You see the funny side. An accident is truly a sad and cruel thing, but, crash, wham, spatoosh, how it makes one giggle and hoot." Here the giant stood and bowed. "At your service," he said. "My good name is Butt, driver of the #1 Super Express mail coach to the Valley of K." Haroun thought he should bow too. "And my, as you say, good name is Haroun." Then he had an idea and added, "If you mean what you say about being at my service, then in fact, there is something you can do." "It was a figure of speech," Mr. Butt replied, but, I will stand by it. A figure of speech is a shifty thing. It can be twisted or it can be straight. But Butt's a straight man, not a twister. What's your wish, my young mister?" Rashid had often told Haroun about the beauty of the road from the town of G to the Valley of K, a road that climbed like a serpent through the pass of H toward the tunnel of I, which was also known as J. There was snow by the roadside, and there were fabulous multicolored birds gliding in the gorges. And when the road emerged from the tunnel, Rashid had said, Then the traveler saw before him the most spectacular view on earth, a vista of the Valley of K, with its golden fields and silver mountains, and with the dull lake at its heart, a view spread out like a magic carpet, waiting for someone to come and take a ride. "No man can be sad who looks upon that sight," Rashid had said, "but a blind man's blindness must feel twice as wretched then." So what Haroun asked Mr. Butt for was this: front row seats in the mail coach, all the way to the dull lake, and a guarantee that the mail coach would pass through the Tunnel of I, also known as J, before sunset, because otherwise the whole point would be lost. But, Mr. Butt protested, "the hour is already late." Then, seeing Haroun's face begin to fall, he grinned broadly and clapped his hands. But, so what?" he shouted, "the beautiful view? To cheer up the sad dad before sunset? No problem." So when Rashid staggered out of the ticket office, he found Haroun waiting on the steps of the mail coach, with the best seats reserved inside and the motor running. The other passengers, who were out of breath from their running, and who were covered in dust which their sweat was turning to mud, stared at Haroun with a mixture of jealousy and awe. Rashid was impressed too. "As I may have mentioned, young Haroun Khalifa, more to you than meets the blinking eye." "Yahoo!" yelled Mr. Butt, who was as excitable as any mail service employee. "Varoom!" he added, and jammed the accelerator pedal right down against the floor. The mail coach rocketed through the gates of the bus depot, narrowly missing a wall on which Haroun read this: "If from speed you get your thrill, take precaution, make your will."